All right, so welcome everyone to Chevalier's Books Online. We are the oldest independent bookstore in Los Angeles, established in 1940. Tonight, we are here to celebrate a very special little book, which was actually one of Chevalier's Books' best-selling titles of 2020, and that is Discovering Griffith Park, A Local's Guide. First with us, we have Beth Pratt. Beth has worked a whopping 25 years in environmental leadership roles and in two of the nation's largest and most beloved national parks, Yosemite and Yellowstone. And tonight we are asking her to use that expertise to interrogate our main star, Casey Schreiner. Casey is the founder and editor-in-chief of modernhiker.com, the most read hiking blog on the West Coast. Through his website and his books, Day Hiking Los Angeles, and of course, Discovering Griffith Park, Casey has made it his mission to encourage us city dwellers to explore the parks and wilderness areas that are often right in our backyards. And I just want to pop in before I hand over the mic, Chevalier's has signed copies. So if you like one, make sure to buy one. All right, so please give a warm digital welcome to our two speakers tonight, Casey Schreiner and Beth Pratt.
Thank you very much. So I'm gonna kick things off, and I'll just say once again that Chevalier's is actually the only store in LA that has signed copies on the shelf. So if you do want a signed copy, please go visit and support your local bookstores. All of our local bookstores are hurting pretty hard with COVID, so I'm really trying to help all of them out because they're great beacons for the community, and just really support them. So I'm going to kick things off with a shortened version of a slideshow presentation about kind of like why Griffith Park is so cool, why LA is lucky to have it, and just what makes it special. If you've seen one of my other presentations before, it'll start off looking familiar, but I promise it's not the monstrous like 170 slide thing that I've been doing. So we're going to keep it nice and short, nice and tight, and then my good friend Beth and I are going to talk about parks and Griffith Park and probably P22 and very long walks and crossing freeways and all sorts of fun stuff. So I'm going to share my screen now, and I'm just going to get right into it. Okay, so throughout the 4 years that I've been working on this book right here, Discovering Griffith Park, I've often been asked the question, why write a book on Griffith Park? And there's a few easy reasons for this. One, I live nearby. I lived right in Town, which is right near the southern entrance. So my commute to work when I was working on this book was very easy. I would just walk out my front door, go up Western Avenue, and be right in the park. So that was pretty choice. Number two, I love the park. Griffith Park was one of the first places I ever visited when I first visited LA way back in 2002. I was really struck by how rugged and wild and weird it was and how close it was to the city. Didn't really appreciate it right away. I was visiting kind of during smog season. It was a little bit gross, but it did make a very strong impression on me. And I've loved the park ever since, and especially while working on the book. I just fell deeper and deeper in love with this place. And number three, it's never been done before. This December, the park will celebrate its 125th anniversary, and it's never had an in-depth guidebook until this book came out. There's great histories about the park. It's been covered in other books, but again, 125 years old, between 10 and 12 million people a year visit this park. It's never had a book like this before. So I just really wanted to be the person to do it. And of course, most of all, the park deserves it, because honestly, I do think that Griffith Park is the best dang city park in the entire country. So here are three main reasons for that, just very top level reasons. Number one, it's huge. People vastly underestimate how big Griffith Park is. Just for some comparisons here, the park that most people think of when they think of like a city park is this. It's Central Park. It's in New York City, obviously. They have good bagels, they got okay tacos, and it's 843 acres. So again, this is kind of what people think of as a city park, right? It's a big rectangle of green space surrounded by very dense built up cities. Closer to home, here in the Golden State, we've got Golden Gate Park. This is up in San Francisco. They've got good burritos, pretty good tacos. I think their taco game is strong. Burritos, I think they beat us, but I think we beat them at tacos. But again, it's rectangular park, big green space surrounded by cities. Golden Gate Park is 1,017 acres, so bigger than Central Park. Still a great city park, a little more rugged than Central Park is, but it's kind of that classic rectangle surrounded by a city. Then we come to the park of the hour. Here's Griffith. Griffith Park is obviously in Los Angeles, where we have most excellent tacos, and it's 4,310 acres and growing. Just to give you a kind of a side-by-side comparison here, this is from the Autry Museum's Investigating Griffith Park exhibit. On the left, this red rectangle area, that's Golden Gate Park in San Francisco inside of Griffith Park. And on the right, this tiny little sliver, that's big New York Central Park. So Griffith Park is huge. It's 5 times the size of Central Park, 4 times the size of Golden Gate Park, and is also just kind of a, it's not a rectangle, so it's a little hard to like take it all in at once. There's not really one spot in the park where you can see everything in the park all in one view. And if we do want to be accurate, it's not the biggest city park in the United States. There are other city parks that are bigger than Griffith. If you've been to Phoenix, the South Mountain Preserve, down in San Diego, Mission Trails, where I am right now, Portland, Oregon Forest Park, those are all bigger than Griffith Park, but almost all of these parks are kind of on the outskirts of the built-up area. Griffith Park is really right in the middle of some of the densest parts of LA. We're talking Hollywood, we're talking Universal City, we're talking Burbank, like very, very dense, very built-up areas. Most of these parks are kind of on the outskirts. Now, the number 2 reason that Griffith Park is such an amazing place is it's famous. Griffith Park history really is Hollywood history. And we're not just talking about the sign here, even though the sign is now in Griffith Park. The park's history really parallels LA's filmmaking history. And what's really cool about Griffith Park is even if you've never been there before, even if you've never visited LA, even if you never even want to visit LA, you have seen Griffith Park before. It's been in so many things. Here's a bunch of movies, recent movies that people may know that Griffith Park has a really big starring role in. La La Land, 2016. The Griffith Observatory in a place called Kathy's Corner on one of the paved roads plays a big role here. Back in 2004, Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, has the climax at the old LA Zoo picnic area. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? The tunnel to Toontown is actually the tunnel to the observatory, which also served to the tunnel to Hill Valley in Back to the Future, Part 2 in 1989. Probably the most famous movie shot in Griffith Park, Rebel Without a Cause, 1955. There's a statue of James Dean at the observatory still. That's kind of how iconic this movie is. And in other parts of the park, there's been movies shot too. 1956, The Searchers. It's an old John Wayne Western, one of my favorites. This is a famous scene shot in Bronson Cave, which you may know more as the Bat Cave from 1966 TV series Batman. That is where the Batmobile rolled out, right in Bronson Canyon right there. And this continues today. When you're walking around the park, it's really common to see something being shot somewhere in the park, from like big budget Hollywood movies with car crashes, on location host stand-ups for TV shows, and even documentaries about the park itself. This is me and Nathan Masters from KCET's Lost LA. We're talking with Mike Eberts, who's the preeminent historian of Griffith Park. This is a great 30-minute documentary. You can stream it for free on KCET's website. Just look for Lost LA Griffith Park. All about the park, its history, its story. It's a really, really fun documentary shoot that we did. And of course, the number 3 reason, it's got a cougar in it. Here is the cat of the hour. This is P22. This is Steve Winter's famous photo on a rare, rare night that the Hollywood sign was actually lit up. Most of the time it's not. This is like kismet in a photo right here. One of the most beautiful pictures of P22 ever. P22, of course, is the sole tracked and collared mountain lion inside Griffith Park. If you're worried about mountain lions, there's a lot of reasons you shouldn't be worried about them, but there's only one in Griffith Park. His name's P22. He's tracked and collared. This is a photo that Miguel Ordenada took. And he's actually the guy who spotted P22 for the very first time. He's a native Angelino. He works at the Natural History Museum of LA County. Really cool guy. And he was kind enough to donate some of these pictures for the book and just for this presentation as well. P22 has a really awesome story that I'm sure Beth and I will get into later. He's a cat that basically came down through the Santa Monica Mountains, crossed the 101, then crossed the 405, then crossed the 101 again, all the way to get into Griffith Park. So thinking about those freeways, some of those freeways are like 10, 12 lanes wide. Anything crossing those freeways, let alone a male mountain lion, is a miracle. And the fact that he made it is incredibly, incredibly special. P22 story is great as well because he's become something of like a spokescat for urban wildlife. He's really helped raise awareness for a lot of the pressures that our native wildlife here in LA is facing. One of those is, as I mentioned, it's not easy to cross the 101 or the 405. So one of the things that Beth is involved with right now is this. It's the Liberty Canyon Overpass. This is, I think it's slated to be start construction later this year. And when it's done being built, it will be the world's largest wildlife overpass. And the reason that these things are important is not just because they look nice and it makes it a nicer commute on the 101, is it actually makes it easy for animals to cross these really artificial boundaries that separate them and keep their genetic diversity up to snuff. Right now, they're getting inbred a little bit, so we need more cats to be able to come in and mate. So we're mixing up those genes and not getting cooked tails and other nasty things. P22 is also an active political cat. He was very important in the anti-rodenticide bill, AB 1788, which actually passed last year. If you remember that picture of P22 from a couple years ago, he was looking really sad. He had mange. He was actually pretty sickened and poisoned by rodenticide. If you've ever seen those black bins outside of restaurants, it's designed to keep rats and other rodents away from food. But what happens is the rats get poisoned, then things eat the rats and they get poisoned. So all the critters here, bobcats, owls, coyotes, hawks, even raccoons, they've all been really adversely affected by these things. Back in 2018, 17 of the 18 mountain lions, 99 of the 111 bobcats, and 23 of the 27 coyotes in the Santa Monica Mountains tested positive for rodenticide poisoning. So AB 1788 is going to be a really, really big step in helping us get rid of that. That goes into effect this year. And of course, that's not really all about Griffith Park. What's really cool about it is you can really tell just about any story about LA, California, maybe even the whole American West through Griffith Park. And it has a little bit of something for everyone. It's got history. It's got stargazing. It's got tons of horseback riding trails. It's got great cycling routes. LA is not a great cycling city, but there are great cycling routes inside Griffith Park. It's got the LA River inside of it. It's got museums and miniature trains. There's more miniature trains. It's got Walt Disney's wash basin, his actual wash basin. It's got live theater. It's got secret societies. It's got baseball diamonds, swimming pools, tennis courts, golf courses, hiking trails, of course. It's got that big sign that you've seen before, the Hollywood sign. It's got native critters. It's got California condors. It's got monkey flowers. It's got secret gardens. It's got pony rides and pretty much everything in between. And that's why Griffith Park is what I think is the best public space in all of Los Angeles and truly one of the greatest city parks in the world. So now I'm going to stop. I'm going to open it up to Beth.
Awesome. Wow. KCP22 wanted to come to your talk tonight. He knows you're his one of his biggest fans. So he's hanging out away from COVID at my house up near Yosemite. So anyway, but Casey, it's just a delight to talk tonight. And this book is, So we met around Griffith, connected to P22 in Griffith Park. And I think that's what's kind of fun. I was the first year we did our sort of P22 Day Festival. I was retracing his route, and I think I reached out to you or you reached out to me, and you were part of that first historic hike. But what you really sort of led me down the path as someone who's very wildlife focused, because that's my job, is just like the eccentric and fascinating and weird and zany history. I think you're right. I think like Griffith Park is like the ultimate mashup in LA, right? Like you said, all roads lead to it, from, Walt Disney to, I think, isn't there a Hugh Hefner statue in Griffith Park as well?
Hugh Hefner played a big role, yes. Yeah.
So, but yeah, to me, the biggest thing is it supports a mountain lion, and there's no other city park in the country that does that, and that Angelinos want him there. So thanks for highlighting him in the talk. But I guess, throwing out to you the history here. This is not just a hiking guide, and I have to thank. When I started working on building the wildlife crossing with the other partners and working on protecting those cats, I was pretty new to Los Angeles. I was a 30-year, at the time, a 20-year California native, but had not been to LA much because I was a snobbish Northern Californian who thought LA offered no wildlife and no hiking. But boy, I didn't even know Griffith Park existed. And I'm just curious, do you, outside of people who live in LA, when you tell people I wrote a book about Griffith Park, are they like, what the hell's that? Or or are you seeing more awareness?
Yes, it's kind of the same thing. I started Modern Hiker back in 2006. And one of the reasons that I did that was because I moved to LA from Connecticut and was not a hiker when I was growing up in New England. And discovering the hiking trails around LA really made me see the city in a different way, and without any hyperbole, kept me sane, and honestly kept me from moving away. I really did not like the city the first couple of years I lived there, and now I'm a diehard Angelino. I will fight for it till the end. I will always defend its honor when someone's making fun of it. And yeah, the thing with Griffith Park is, if even in LA, I think people don't really know Griffith Park that well. But when you start saying, oh, it's the Hollywood sign, oh, it's Griffith Observatory, oh, you've seen it in every single TV show and commercial and movie, then people start to get interested. And, really just digging into the story of the park. I always joke that I pitch my publisher hiking guides, and they're basically disguised history books that I can write, so that I can dig up all these fun stories, because Griffith Park is really just full of amazing stories. Going all the way back to the Gabrielino Tongva people who lived there for generations upon generations before any Europeans got there. And they're still here, they're still active. There's new research being done by the Auction Museum that shows that there might have been actually 3 settlements in and around the area of Griffith Park. It's the site that the first ever Spaniard who came through Los Angeles camped inside Griffith Park, Juan Bautista de Anza. Charting the overland route from Mexico all the way up to Monterey, California. Then the original settlers of LA, the Pobladores, the commander of that, was on that expedition. So he came through Griffith Park, and he was actually awarded the land for Rancho Los Feliz, which became the Los Feliz neighborhood, which became Griffith Park. There's just so much in the history of Griffith Park that connects it to LA beyond just the amazing hiking trails and the wildlife and the fun native plants and all that other great stuff. There's just, it really is a little bit of it's a little thing for everyone in LA, and LA doesn't really have a lot of stuff that's like that. And it certainly doesn't have a lot of things like that you can access for free. Right.
And you're right. I mean, again, I want to put in a plug for your other, when I was first learning about LA, this really helped orient me. It was a hiking guide, but like you said, a lot of history. And then, this just came out, but you taught me a lot about Griffith Park. And I think I do want to talk about a lot of the fun stories, but just to stress to people, I think it isn't the biggest park, but it is the biggest park in a city with wilderness. And I think what people don't understand about LA is, unlike a lot of cities, even like the Bay Area, where San Francisco is surrounded by open space, but it's not in the city. And I think that's what really surprised me about LA is you get the Santa Monica Mountains are not just around the city, but run right into Griffith Park. You have, and that's why you can have mountain lions and coyotes, you know, really within the city limits. So it's a pretty incredible city. And I'm like you, I went from dissing it to now I am its biggest defender. I'm like, LA's got a lot going on from every angle. And, San Francisco, you're kind of tired at this point, right? Even though I worked in San Francisco for years. So I'm with you. I've become very patriotic about LA. And I think that leads me to, I think we talked about this. What I love about Griffith Park and what I love about LA, and I know it's an overused word, but diversity, but, LA is an incredibly diverse city. And so is Griffith Park. There's so many different stories from different cultures, like you said, going back to the Tongava, but immigrants coming and sort of putting their footprint down in Griffith Park, planting gardens, but yeah, why don't you tell a couple of those? Because they're, like Amir's garden or Amir's, I probably pronounced it wrong. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are just so many great stories in Griffith Park. And one of the great things about it is so many of those stories fall into that very classic Californian, classic Western, like I'm going to come and make a new life for myself story. So you've got, Jose Vicente Feliz, who was the guy who he came up with the De Anza expedition. He worked as basically a military commissioner for the Pueblo of LA. Then he went down to San Diego for a little bit. Then he came back up to LA and was basically like an early mayor of the Pueblo for his service. This was a guy who had nothing in Mexico, came up here and was granted Rancho Los Feliz. His family kept that for generations upon generations. There was a really awesome lady named Doña Maria Ignacia Verdugo, who was a later descendant who secured the water rights to the LA River for Rancho Los Feliz and ran successful cattle brands and really defended her land at the time when a lot of like Yankee lawyers were coming over and just taking advantage of messy paperwork to steal a lot of the land from the original Spanish settler families and the Mexican settler families. That became Griffith Park, eventually owned by Griffith J. Griffith, who himself he grew up an orphan in South Wales, poor as dirt, literally slept on a dirt floor with like 10 of his stepbrothers and sisters, moved to the United States with no money, adopted a family who lost their son in the Civil War, taught himself journalism, moved out to California, made his name in journalism and real estate and investments, became one of the earliest philanthropists of LA and one of the first people to really envision LA as a global city, who really saw the importance of parks, and with his donation of the land to the park. And then later on, you've got people like Dante Orligini, who is known as Dante's View, if you've seen that on the east flank of Mount Hollywood. That was a citizen garden. Basically, this guy, Dante Orligini, he was an Italian immigrant who moved over here. He actually designed and painted the courthouse fresco in Santa Barbara that's still up there. You can still go see it. He spoke like 4 languages. He was a journalist. He wrote for entertainment newspapers and stuff. And he built this little garden up in Griffith Park just all by himself that became a very beloved part of Griffith Park. Charlie Turner was the unofficial mayor of Griffith Park for a long time. When he passed away, that was taken up by Tom LeBond, the recently departed Tom LeBond, who took over and was really instrumental in Griffith Park for many, many years, really big champion of the park. And then to the north of that, Amir's garden, Amir Diamale. I always don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right.
Yeah, me either. I'm never.
Yeah, the former caretaker told me how to pronounce it, but it was years ago, and I haven't heard from her in a while. So, but he came and that area, Amir's garden, was totally scorched by a wildfire, and he came up and by hand hauled up buckets of water and dirt and just started replanting stuff on his own. He was working full time as a wine merchant, and then he would come to the park after hours, haul his stuff up there, and he basically built that whole garden by hand by himself. And he did it to, as he was inspired by the spirit of American volunteerism. He said you should make things better than when you found them. And he really, really was inspired by that. And there's just stories like that all over the park of people coming in and kind of saying, I want to give something back to this community and I want to make something nice for other people. And it's just a really rare place in LA to have access to stuff like that.
Right. That's what I love about your book, is you're reading through, what to do on this hike. Those stories emerge. It's like I said, it's just a delightful way to discover the people that still make Griffith Park special. But again, that sort of diversity in that, you're right, it's a very American or Western story about, reinvention. And I think Griffith Park's just become more than it was because, I have to talk about the Hollywood sign, because I have to admit, I love the Hollywood sign. I don't know why. You think I wouldn't as an environmentalist, or I don't know why, but it's sort of the North Star of LA, like wherever you are, you sort of orient yourself with the Hollywood sign. And I love that a mountain lion lives under the Hollywood sign. To me, it's sort of like a symbol of the last ice age, is living under the symbol of our age. And what a mashup, right? But there's also kind of, again, another zany, fun history around that, starting with, I did not know, even with my background, my biology and natural history, that Hollywood is named after the Toyon plant. I did not know, which is a very important native plant throughout. I have them in my yard, right? Important food source, important. So I did not know that. So thank you. But how the Hollywood sign came about has to do with real estate and Alice Cooper and Hugh Hefner. So can you tell the story? Because it's something that we all know. I mean, who in the U.S. doesn't know? But I don't think people know the story behind it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Hollywood is the Hollywood sign is it's fun. You really run the gamut of reactions to it here in LA. Some people are over it, really in the same way that I think Parisians are kind of over the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
Both were meant to be temporary, right? The original Hollywoodland, it was Hollywoodland originally. It was the Hollywoodland sign. Was only meant to be up for 14 months. It was not meant to be a permanent thing, but it's sort of become this accidental landmark that people love. Like you think of LA, you think of the Hollywood sign, for better or worse. It's our landmark, it's our trademark, and there's a lot of contention now because people who live near the neighborhood that's near the Hollywood sign don't want people coming in there, which I totally get, because those roads were built in the 20s. They're not built for today's cars by any means, and there shouldn't be that much traffic up there in the first place. But it's here to stay. Speaking of, just to backtrack on the Toyon, I have some native plant tattoos. So I've got, when I finished this book, I added a Toyon leaf. For those who don't know, the Toyon, sometimes called California holly or Christmas berry sometimes, is you see it all over LA, all over California. There's a couple cool things about it. One, it's really one of the few things that's berrying around November through January. So that's why it's kind of called California holly. It's all over Southern California, all over LA. It's a great native plant, easy to grow, great habitat for birds, stays green all year round. Lots of native nurseries around here have it. It's the only California native plant to maintain its indigenous name from the Ohlone people up in the Bay Area. So it's still called Toyon from the Ohlone word. And it's actually the official city plant of LA. Which I think is really cool, that we have a native plant, first of all, and then it's an indigenous plant. But the story of the Hollywood sign, was that whole area, the Hollywoodland, was meant to be a real estate development, 1920s, 1930s, very early, kind of selling that suburban dream to Midwesterners moving out, getting out of Ohio, getting away from winter. You can come live in LA where it's great weather all year round and have this really cool house in the hill. Up, and you can commute down to Hollywood, which at that time was its own city, had its own little red car line running there. Eventually the Depression happened. It became too expensive to keep building those houses. So the Hollywoodland development actually gave a lot of land to Griffith Park. It was one of the earliest additions of land to Griffith Park. But the Hollywood sign was not a part of Griffith Park until much, much later. In the 70s, the sign was in great disrepair. One of the letters was knocked down in a windstorm. Another letter was set on fire. If anyone's seen the movie Argo from a couple years ago, there's a great opening shot where they do a helicopter CG shot where you see the Hollywood sign and it looks like a dump. But that's how it looked. No one was taking care of it. The Hollywood Chamber of Commerce didn't really seem to care that much. But there was a group of celebrities Hugh Hefner was in there, Alice Cooper was in there, Gene Autry was in there. These big celebrities who raised money to basically revitalize the Hollywood sign. They replaced it with taller metal signs or metal letters that we have today that stand up to the elements a lot better. And now it's become this big landmark. But the actual land of the Hollywood sign didn't become a part of Griffith Park until pretty recently. I think it was like I always get the date wrong. It's like 2014 or 2012. It was recent, where basically all that land on Cahuenga Peak was privately held land. Oddly enough, that used to be owned by Howard Hughes. Again, weird Hollywood celebrities. Howard Hughes wanted to build a mansion on top of it and take one. I think it was Greta Garbo he was dating at the time, and Greta Garbo said very famously, "I think if he gets me up to that house, I will never come down." Not meaning that she loved it, meaning that like he's probably going to hold me hostage up there. Howard Hughes, not a very stable personality. So he passed away. All of his land fell through these like real estate holding companies and all this stuff. And then, back in maybe it was like 2008 or so, maybe it was earlier than that. This real estate development said, "Hey, once in a lifetime opportunity, build your house behind the Hollywood sign." And the whole city of LA had like a record scratch moment and said, "What?
No way."
Because we all assumed that it was part of the park. It's green space. It was open, but it was actually privately held land. So again, the Trust for Public Land, Eileen Getty, and Hugh Hefner again stepped up and raised money with the city of LA to buy that land and add it permanently to the park. So that's why if you're hiking behind the Hollywood sign, you'll see things like the Eileen Getty Ridge Trail, and also there's a plaque dedicated to Hugh Hefner.
That's
there.
what, yeah,
so
I
if
love
you're
that.
walking around and you're like, why is the Playboy guy memorialized in Griffith Park? It's because he donated a lot of money over many years to protect the park.
Yeah.
So that's why.
Yeah, again, was such a great history. And I would be remiss if I didn't put in a plug for a group who I love. I'm friends with, Friends of Griffith Park,
Yes.
who really are incredible current stewards of the park. They're partners with us, the National Wildlife Federation, when we do P22 Day every year in Griffith Park that celebrates him. And by the way, you left out, I think, and I can get you some graphics. P22, I think, most, it fits with the weirdness of Griffith Park, that P22 is the first koala in the history of the planet. I mean, the first mountain lion in the history of the planet to eat a koala. That's just never happened in evolutionary history before. But as Casey outlines in his book, the LA Zoo is in Griffith Park, and they had koala as an exhibit, and P22 just thought it was a weird raccoon, and it made worldwide news that he did that, and LA rallied around him, up to the mayor, and even the zoo said, "Hey, our bad, we'll make our fences higher." So I think that's one of his definitely most weirdest accomplishments.
Yes, I now that you mentioned, I totally forgot about that. I used to talk about that in presentations.
Yeah.
And I had a couple people say, like, it's kind of a bummer to think about him eating a koala bear.
Yeah.
So I took it out.
Yeah, I didn't used to use it because it was a little too close to joke about it, but now now it's all bets are off. Enough distance has gone by. But that leads me to another. So Griffith Park, although bears are in the sort of the outskirts of LA. There's a mountain lion in Griffith Park, but not a real bear, but there is a fake bear, which again has some of that history about people becoming their own. Can you tell the story of the bear that you can high five?
Yes, so this is on the very southern entrance of the park, on your way up to Ferndale from Los Feliz Boulevard, right before it turns into Western. Is one of my favorite entrances. That's the one I used to hike into. And if you're walking past it, you will see a bear that's kind of doing this. And I have a hike in my book that basically goes from the bear all the way up to Travel Town. And I'm trying to start this tradition of having people high five the bear before they do a hike up there. I don't know if that's taken off or not yet, but people do dress up the bear for Halloween and for Christmas and for other holidays. They put hats on him and stuff, which is really fun. But the bear was actually donated by the city of West Berlin back in the 60s. I think 1968 was when West Berlin became a sister city of Los Angeles. And if you know the Berlin Forest, which is just above the observatory, that's another area where still to this day, whenever dignitaries from Germany come and visit LA, they plant a new pine tree up in the Berlin forest. So the Berlin bear was the first like kind of addition from the city of West Berlin. Now it's, you know, unified Berlin, and it's still there. We're still sister cities, and there is some reciprocal gardens somewhere in Berlin. I couldn't track it down, and I can't imagine that palm trees do very well in Berlin, Germany. But I don't know what we give them in return for the pine trees that they give us. But it's a really cool way to be sister cities. And if you're up in the Berlin forest, you can see they've added new signage in the past year that kind of shows you distance to Berlin and talks about, you know, when it started and how the sister city program works. And it's a very, very cool program.
So this is where, so Casey and I was joking, we'll probably talk about something inappropriate because we're friends and we have a similar really dark senses of humor. But one story I love in your book, you know, I often talk about P22, and one of the reasons he's able to remain in Griffith Park, it's a really small area for a mountain lion, and mountain lion territories are based on available prey, right? So usually you need much larger territory to have enough deer, but what do you have in the small Griffith Park? Well, you have all the celebrity houses around Griffith Park, and we could do a whole talk on all the celebrities you'll see while you're hiking Griffith Park. It's like, oh, wait a minute, I recognize that person. Like, that's every hike in Griffith Park. But so you have all the celebrities with their gardens, but you also have Forest Lawn Cemetery, which, you know, there's something really, again, weird about this cemetery with Michael Jackson and others sustaining P22 because of the grass, right, that grows on top of it. So, but I learned from your book how they kind of, because it is kind of weird. Why do we have a cemetery in a public park? But they kind of pulled a really morbid, fast one to get that cemetery legal back in the day, which if you don't mind telling it, it is, it's kind of a really morbid story, but it's kind of funny too, I have to say.
Yeah, this is a really, really strange story. So if you've ever wondered why there's a huge chunk just north of Griffith Park that looks like it would be a perfect addition to Griffith Park, but it's a cemetery and a mausoleum. So that land used to be part of a different rancho. It wasn't part of Rancho Los Feliz. It was part of Rancho Providencia. And that maintained in private land for quite some time. Actually, I spoke with some old timers at the Equestrian Center who had these great stories about the early Western movie actors. They would actually camp out where the Forest Lawn Cemetery is right now. They would camp out there. They would cross the LA River on their horses, go to Warner Brothers Studios, go to Disney Studios, shoot their Westerns, head to the Equestrian Center, all get drunk at the saloons, get into fights, and then cross the river and sleep it off back at Rancho Providencia. So in the 60s, I believe, LA was looking for, basically that land was up for grabs. And the city put in a bid to add it to Griffith Park, but the Forest Lawn Cemetery Corporation outbid them. There was a huge, huge uproar. At that time, the LA River was still a source of water for the city. It wasn't our major source. By that time, we had the California Aqueduct, and we were taking money from water from the Colorado River. So it wasn't the main source, but it was still like, hey, here's a river that we still get drinking water from that still goes down through a big chunk of the city. Do we want bodies buried nearby? And that was the big push kind of against it. A lot of people spoke out against it. Some of the Griffith descendants actually spoke out against it. I think they tried to sue about it as well. But the way that they were able to get around it was, while this was sort of tied up in legal battles, but the Forest Lawn Cemetery actually owned the land, there's this very obscure law on the books in California at the time where if you have a plot of land and there are 3 bodies buried in that land, then that land is forever considered a cemetery and there's nothing you can do to change it. So late at night, the landowners from Forest Lawn basically took 3 bodies from the nearby, like unclaimed bodies from a nearby morgue, and buried them overnight. Journalists figured out what was going on. They tried to chase them down. They were chased out by the Forest Lawn people. And then they kind of said next morning, guess what? It's a cemetery now. Not much you can do about it. So that's what we have now. We still have a cemetery. But as you mentioned, like, I think that place is like the primary source of food for deer. If you go there during the day, it is like swarming with deer. So at least it's got, at least it's providing snacks for P22 who otherwise.
Yeah, it's keeping, like I said, who else is, Ronnie James Dio's buried there. I mean, there's just something so
Yes, yeah.
Californian about all these celebrities keeping actually P-22 alive because of the decorative lawn on top of, I mean, you can't make that up, right? You just can't. And I know I just want to do a time check, Teresa. We're going to do questions shortly, but I wanted to get in two more, and hopefully they're quick ones. But one is not actually related to the cemetery, but there's ghosts in Griffith Park, right? I mean, I love that also we have this kind of like, I mean, every park needs like a monster or a ghost, especially a Hollywood one. So yeah, what are some of the fun ghost stories we have in Griffith Park?
Yeah, so LA is certainly not short on creative storytellers, and that is seen in the ghost stories of Griffith Park. I worked with the book with the Autry Museum's Dr. Carolyn Brucken, and she's been a tremendous resource for everything in the book with history and artifacts and stuff. And she and I joked that she's always asked the question, "Tell me about the curse of Griffith Park." She's like, I'm a historian. Like, don't ask me about ghost stories. But I actually think that from a storytelling perspective, ghost stories are a really interesting way to learn about what's going on at the time that those stories were told. So the most famous one is the curse of Griffith Park. And the shortened version of that story is at the time, the land was still in the hands of a Los Feliz family. There was a smallpox epidemic in LA. So one of the Los Felizes sent his two nieces out of town to protect them from smallpox. He ended up dying. And then one of his nieces, her name was Petronilla, she came back to LA to find, oh, all the land that my father had now belongs to his lawyer. And all I have is this wooden dresser. And that's all I have to my name from his will. So according to legend, she cursed the land and said that until it was back in the hands of a Los Feliz family, everyone who owned this land would experience ruin and terror. And if you look at the people who owned the land right afterward, they didn't turn out so hot. One of the landowners was killed by bandits in Mexico. Another landowner, all of his cattle died mysteriously overnight, and he lost all of his money. Griffith J. Griffith, when he owned the land, he was a secret alcoholic who ended up shooting his wife in the face in Santa Monica, and he went to prison for 3 years and basically was booted out of LA society. And so if you look at those stories, you can say, oh, maybe there is a curse.
Yeah.
When you dig into the details, a historian named John Robinson, who's a big inspiration of mine, he kind of dug into these many years ago and found out that they were all kind of, they were squishy enough that it wasn't really real. Like the timeline didn't really work out. And actually Petronilla lived a very happy life with the man who owned that land, and like she was a very happy lady there. But what that story does tell us is that's what was happening at the time. It was these Americans coming in from the Midwest and the East Coast, taking advantage of these messy contracts and land deeds and stealing this land. It was a changing time for Los Angeles, a changing time for California. So there is a lot of truth to that ghost story, even though the ghost story itself is not true. One of the more fun recent stories is the story of haunted picnic table number 29.
Yes, that one, that's a Hollywood tale. Like somebody needs to do that movie.
which is such a great story. If you don't know it, again, the shortened version is there's a picnic table. It's called picnic table number 29. It's on the north side of the park, just on the north side of like where Mount Chapel is off Mount Hollywood Drive. And the story is that this couple was in flagrante delicto there, and they were caught in the Santa Ana winds, and they were killed by a downed tree. And a maintenance worker several weeks later was trying to saw the tree off to fix the table, and he apparently heard these voices saying, "Get out, get out." So he like had chills. He left. He told the supervisor, "I'm not doing that tree. You got to take care of that yourself." So the supervisor said, "You're insane. There's no such thing as ghosts." He went up there. He went down to chop the tree, remove it, and he heard the voices. He stayed to continue to remove the tree, and he had a heart attack and ended up dying. This was all reported in an online story that looked like it was in the LA Times, but it was not. It was a spoof website. If you look at the URL, it's LITIRNES. This was back in early web times. The site is actually still up. It still looks like the LA Times looked in 2006. And actually, from doing these presentations and talking about the book, The guy who wrote that story actually got in touch with me and said, I'm the guy who said that. I had no idea how this became a real thing. There's videos on YouTube of ghost hunters going and they're like, I heard the voices, and it's all shaky camera footage. But what he did tell me, which I think is such a great addition to that story, is if you read it, all the people mentioned in it, the couple, they're portmanteaus. So the guy is a portmanteau of his former best friend, and the woman is a portmanteau of his former wife. So there is a very messy story behind that ghost story, but it's a great piece of Hollywood lore right in Griffith Park.
That is awesome. So we're going to go to questions, but my last question to you, which again is such a Griffith Park question, and it should be pretty quick to answer. Favorite celebrity sighting in Griffith Park?
Oh my God. Well, okay. So oh my God, I missed when Justin Trudeau was in the park. He was hiking with the mayor up in
that nice photo.
Hollywood.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I missed that one. God, who is the most famous person I've seen up there?
Or your favorite? Doesn't have to be most famous, like your favorite celebrity.
I will say my favorite is when you hike that park frequently, you will see the regulars in that park. And what's great is it's a worldwide, it's a famous park that people from all over the world come to. It's also people's backyard and their regular neighborhood park. So you'll see all assortment of wonderful Hollywood weirdos hiking in that park. There was a guy when I was trail running for the Firecracker 10K down in Chinatown. I would run up to Mount Hollywood and back, and there was a guy in like those rubber jogging suits that I would see every day, just like sweating all over the place. There was a guy who would walk up with a parrot on his shoulder the whole time. And then, of course, you'd see regulars like Tom LeBonge was up there all the time. I would see him in Ferndale doing maintenance. I would see him hiking up to Mount Hollywood. It really is its own little community up there. And that to me was kind of my favorite part.
It is fun.
Of hiking and writing the book.
I will say celebrity, my favorite, I didn't see him, but there's that famous video, Hiking While Black, with Blair Underwood in Griffith Park. I'm pretty sure it's, it's hilarious. But anyway. All right. Well, I think I've run out of time to pepper you with questions. So Teresa, you're going to take over audience questions for us. But I just can't say enough. Casey's an incredible person. I've learned a lot from him. He's a lot of fun. And I think that fun really comes out in his books. So you will learn a lot. You'll also learn how to explore, Griffith Park. Even me, who's there tracking mountain lions, sometimes didn't know all the opportunities there. So anyway, I'll turn it over to you, Teresa.
Thank you. All right, so everyone, we are going into the Q&A portion of our evening. If you do have a question, again, make sure to drop it into the chat box. There's a couple lined up, but we'll make sure to get to yours. I'm going to cut the queue, though, because I'm the host, and start with my own question. And so, Casey, you mentioned a bit about when you first moved to LA, but when did you take it upon yourself to sort of to be on this mission of meshing the outdoors with urban living?
I think for me, it was a gradual process. Part of the growth I had with Modern Hiker was just discovering all the stuff that was out here, and then growing the website and just really kind of trumpeting all these great, tremendous resources that LA had that I felt really weren't known by as many people as they should have. And then I sort of had an experience where I was in the greater outdoor community at large. People really look down on places like LA. They look down on cities in general. Cities are seen, like, generally presented as things to get out of, screaming in your car on your way to some campsite somewhere. And for me, one of my favorite things about LA was I could spend 45 minutes driving up to the Angeles Crest, hiking and being the only person around for 20 or 30 miles, but still come back, grab an In-N-Out, go home and sleep in my own bed. Like, that to me was an amazing thing that LA has, that really, as Beth mentioned, a lot of other cities don't have that. They don't have that, like, a wilderness that's inside the city. So a lot of my sort of trumpeting of, like, hey, urban parks are great too. Parks like Griffith Park are great too. Hike in the Verdugos, that's awesome. Hike in Franklin Canyon, hike in Runyon Canyon. Those are great places to get outside. Part of that was really sort of a reaction to the sort of, like, quote unquote real hikers who look down on, a trail that's not 12 miles long, that won't kill you if you don't do it the right way. Like, in my mind, are you outside? Are you getting fresh air? Are you looking at wildlife? Are you looking at plants? Are you having a good time? You're on a hike. Congratulations. You're doing a good job.
We've got a question from Shelly Drew. Let me scroll a bit. Shelly's asking, how did so many different types of activities end up in one park? Is there a grand plan, or did all those activities kind of come up on their own?
Sure. So there is a master plan for Griffith Park. It's updated every, I think, 8 years or so, and generally kind of gives like a guideline for like what the park is, what it's for. And if you look at the plans over the years, they've changed drastically. I think in the 1930s, when the CCC was involved, lots of public money was pouring into these parks. That's when a lot of our trails were built. That's when the observatory was built. There was a plan to actually heavily irrigate Griffith Park. There was a plan to essentially divert the LA River into Griffith Park and give it the annual precipitation that was about what Miami has. If you're in the Ferndale area where there's kind of the stream, there used to be fountains that used to be more heavily irrigated. There were plans to build lakes. They were going to stock them with trout so people could go fishing. There was going to be a waterfall on top of Mount Hollywood. There were going to be hostels inside the park. So part of that is like, well, that would have been kind of cool, but I'm glad that didn't happen, because we have, as Beth said, it's a rare urban park with wilderness in it. But if you go back to Colonel Griffith's donation, he wrote a book in 1910 that really lays out his park philosophy. And in his mind, he always saw Griffith Park as two things. It's a park that's part manicured playground. So that's golf courses, that's the Greek theater, that's the observatory. It's those gardens, those more formal parks. That was an important part of it. But he really regarded the backcountry, the chaparral, the untamed wilderness. That was the real playground for him. And he wanted to make sure that we never confused the frame of the thing for the thing itself. He saw the gardens as the frame, but the real thing we were supposed to enjoy was this rugged backcountry experience. So I think now we're sort of always finding that balance of what do we have that's developed, what do we have that's rugged. LA in general tends to go more toward development. So I think as people who care about the park, we need to be fighting that and making sure that if there is development, that it's done the right way, and really protecting the open spaces that we have, because we really don't have that many open spaces left in LA, and certainly not in an area as densely populated as where Griffith Park is.
Yeah, and absolutely. Talking about development, Lauren is actually asking about that land bridge that we mentioned a little bit earlier. And she also is curious about, like, is there any sort of concern that P22 might leave his current habitat and not come back?
Actually, I will let Beth answer that, because she's much more qualified.
Sure. Well, first, the wildlife crossing actually won't help him. It is about 30 miles to the west on the 101. So he's inspiring it, but it's not going to get him out of Griffith Park. What I like to say is it's, he's sort of the martyr for the cause, and he's going to inspire to help save the rest of his mountain lion relatives. If the bridge had been in when he was coming of age and needed to find a home, he probably wouldn't be in Griffith Park. But he's been there. It's interesting. He's been there since 2012. And again, this is not typical for a mountain lion. He's not left. Usually they travel, over their whole territory of 100, 200 miles. But perhaps not surprisingly, I think he's just come to terms with, hey, I'm not crossing those freeways again. There's plenty of deer here. Bachelorhood is not all that bad because he is alone and, is never going to have a girlfriend, which for a mountain lion is not that big a hardship. They are pretty much a love them and leave them species. They're solitary creatures. They live alone, unlike African lions. They don't live in pride. So, for P22, bachelorhood isn't a stretch. But I will tell you, I'll end with Miguel, who is an amazing person as well, a friend. He still has cameras up around Griffith Park. P22 hasn't given up even after all these years. He caught on some of the new cameras that have sound, P22 making the very quiet sound that mountain lions make for, hey, is anybody out there? So he hasn't given up looking for love. And that's why I think LA loves him. We all have been dating challenged because of the 405, and P22 is no exception.
I also love this mini P22 that you have with you right now.
This is, yeah, this is actually,
yeah.
yeah, there's the real well, the cut up, but this is one of my animals, a mini mountain lion, who, yes, wanted to join.
We've got another question from a Tom Rogers, who, thank you, bought the book from Chevalier's and is loving it. He's asking that he's been trying a bunch of new hikes around the Mineral Wells area. And Casey or even Beth, what is your favorite 1 to 2 hour hike in the park?
Sure. I think one of my favorite hikes around there is in the north side of the park. If you park, it's a loop, so you can kind of park anywhere around this. But if you park near Travel Town, that's kind of a good place to start. Head south on the Oak Canyon Trail, and then it kind of snakes around in the middle. You're kind of near the road for a lot of it, and then you hop back up onto the Skyline Trail, which really gives you, especially this time of year, oh my God, right now, from like now through like March or April is the best time to be hiking in Southern California. All of our native plants are going to be waking up soon. It's the best time to be inside Griffith Park. So get out as many times as you can before it gets way too hot this summer. It's the best time to be there. The skies are clear. You'll have amazing views of the Verdugos to the north. You can see the San Gabriel sometimes as well. If it's exceptionally clear from that trail, you can even sometimes see Mount Baldy and San Gorgonio and even San Jacinto from there. Santiago Peak down in Orange County, you can see from there. It's amazing. And what's great about the north side of the park is it's generally less crowded. The north side of the park is kind of more the equestrian area. It's great for hiking as well, but that trail is probably about an hour and a half, and you can make it longer if you want. You can make it tougher if you want as well. If you really want to make that one tough, you from the Oak Canyon Trail go up the Suicide Trail. One of the toughest trails in the park. It's really narrow, really rugged, very, very steep. Not signed all that great, so you might get lost up there. But there's great native chaparral back there. Gooseberry plants that are beautiful around February and March. And then you hop back up on the Toyon Trail and you get these amazing, beautiful views of the north side of the park.
Okay, I think we have time for just about a last question, which I do have, which is, when you were writing the book, was there any hesitance about like, oh, do I really want to tell anyone about like my favorite part or the secret part of the park that only I know? Or were you just like, oh, I'm going to share everything and I want everyone to know?
Yeah, that is, that's sort of it's the knowledge sharer's dilemma, in that we fall in love with these places and we write about them as we knew them. But we have to come to terms with the fact that the way that we know things is not permanent. And there's a lot of pushback in the hiking community. I think the very first comment I ever got on Modern Hiker back in 2006 was someone complaining about me talking about a trail and said, don't send people up on my trail. It's a complicated situation. It's not your trail. There are trails. And the way that we inspire people to love these places is by introducing them to them. If you don't know what Griffith Park is, if you don't know how fragile it is, by experiencing some of these great hikes in the backcountry, you'll think, oh, it's that place with the zoo. It's all paved over and whatever. I don't care what happens to it. If you know how fragile that land is, then you see people coming out against things like this gondola proposal that was recent, which would have affected some of the rare untouched land inside Griffith Park. That was shot down because people cared about it, because people knew about these places. So there are definitely places in the park in the park that I really treasure, and I know that they will get more crowded. I also have found a good balance of all that information is in the book. If you want to put in the effort of reading the book and going by yourself and doing these hikes and discovering these places for yourself, they're yours too. I have no ownership stake in them, but I definitely do in some of these presentations. There are certain parts of the park that I don't mention in the presentations just because I want to make sure that I can still get to them and not to fight a crowd.
For sure. Okay, so an enormous heartfelt thank you to both our speakers, Pratt and Casey Schreiner, tonight. Thank you for sharing your time and insight with us. Before we say goodbye, I am again going to say that if you would like to order a signed copy of Discovering Griffith Park, you can just go to our website or click that link I just dropped into the chat box, and we will make sure you get your copy. Okay? All right, so Casey and Beth, again, thank you. Do either of you have any last words for us before we say goodbye?
I would just like to say thank you for having me. And thank you, Beth, for being here. As Beth knows, we chatted during pandemic round 1 last year, and we ended up talking for like 90 minutes with a totally unstructured conversation all about parks. I love talking about Griffith Park, and I can very easily talk about it for days. It's one of my favorite things, and I'm very much looking forward to being able to lead hikes in the park again. So if you want to stay up to date, go to modernhiker.com. You can sign up for my email newsletter. And when I can come back and do that stuff, I will be doing it very gladly. And if you are interested in wanting to become an active member of the park and being involved in it, definitely sign up for the Friends of Griffith Park. They are the best organization that's working in the park right now. I've done native plant installations with them. I've done invasive plant weeding with them. It's so much fun to volunteer. They do raptor counts every year that always sell out. They are the best group. Their newsletter is amazing too. And if you're kind of wonky, if you're into policy, if you want to see how the sausage gets made, the Griffith Park Advisory Board meets at the last week of every month, and they're doing it virtually now. That's where you can find out about, development in the park, what plans are in the park. That's where we found out about the Griffith Park line, the new transit shuttle that was in the park last year, the gondola for the first time, and lots of other plans for the park. So if you want to get involved, those two organizations, I very, very strongly recommend joining.
They do great work. The only thing I'll add is come to, again, Casey's work's incredible. Please, his books are treasures. It's really made, helped me on my journey to become a patriotic Angelino. But Griffith Park is a special place. Me, who's worked in Yellowstone and Yosemite, puts it up there with those two parks. There's just something about it. And I think that, that a mountain lion has blessed it with its, its stamp of approval, that's incredible. I will say, come to P22 Day. We hold that in Griffith Park. Casey is there. Obviously, we had to go virtual this past year, but we do hope that this upcoming year we'll be able to, able to be in person again. We had 8,000 people in 2019 coming out to Griffith Park to celebrate wildlife. So I think, it's just a testament to the zany, but also this incredible value system around appreciating all the weirdness and wonkiness that LA has to offer, from a park that has Hugh Hefner to a mountain lion, a Hugh Hefner memorial to a mountain lion. And again, I just think Casey's captured that so lovingly in this book. So thanks for having me, Casey, and I can't wait to be able to see you in person again. It's been too long.
All right, thank you both, and have a great rest of your night, everyone. Take care.